Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. The red and blue flashing lights illuminated the front of the house, casting eerie shadows against the garage door. A cluster of nosy neighbors had already gathered at the edge of the driveway, whispering among themselves. Some clutched their robes tighter in the cool evening air, while others leaned in eagerly, waiting for the latest neighborhood spectacle to unfold. At the center of it all stood Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, arms crossed and an unmistakable smirk on her face. I stepped outside barefoot, holding my still steaming coffee mug, wearing nothing but gym shorts and an old law school t-shirt. I blinked at the scene before me, then glanced at the two uniformed police officers standing by their patrol cars. Ah, is there a problem, officers? One of them, a middle-aged man with an apologetic expression, shifted uncomfortably before clearing his throat. Sir, we received a report of an illegal structure on your property. Silence. I looked at him, then at Karen, then back at him. You're telling me someone. I gestured toward the smug figure in yoga pants and a rhinestone-encrusted live laugh love hoodie. Called the cops on my garage? Karen stepped forward, eyes gleaming with triumph. Not just a garage, she sneered. An unauthorized modification to a residential structure. That door wasn't there last year, and that fancy security system, well, let's just say it's raising some serious concerns. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the absurdity of the situation wash over me. So, just to be clear, you're calling the police over a garage door and a security camera? She huffed. It's more than that. It's a commercial operation, and you know it. There are bylaws against that kind of thing, and we have every right to enforce them. The officers exchanged wary glances. They were already realizing this was a waste of their time, but professionalism dictated they at least go through the motions. The older one turned back to me. Sir, do you mind if we take a look? I shrugged. Be my guest. I stepped aside, letting them walk up to my offensive garage. One of them ran a hand along the brand new door, while the other inspected the camera mounted just above it. They peered through the garage window. No illegal business, no underground casino, just a law-abiding garage doing what garages do. It's just a regular garage, the younger officer muttered, shooting his partner a knowing glance. Karen, however, wasn't done. You don't understand. He's using this as a front for something. Just look at all those tools inside. Nobody needs that many tools unless they're running some sort of illegal operation. I allowed a sharp laugh. Karen, it's a garage. What do you expect to find in there? A chandelier and a grand piano? Karen's face turned red. Don't get smart with me. Even the attorney general has to follow the rules. At that, both cops snapped their heads toward me. The older one narrowed his eyes slightly. Wait a second. You're the attorney general? I nodded, enjoying the way the color drained from their faces I connected the dots. That's right, Karen blinked, clearly not understanding why the officers suddenly looked like they wanted to be anywhere but here. So she snapped, that doesn't mean he's above HOA regulations. The younger officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, the Attorney General is literally in charge of overseeing state law. If there were any actual violations here, he'd know. Karen faltered for half a second, but quickly recovered. Well, we'll see about that, she said, crossing her arms. The HOA will be reviewing this matter, and I assure you the board won't tolerate any violations, Attorney General or not. I could practically hear the dramatic music playing in her head. She thought she'd won. The officers, realizing this wasn't going anywhere, nodded toward me. Sorry for the disturbance, sir, the older one said, looking both embarrassed and exasperated. Looks like there's nothing criminal here. Have a good night. The patrol cars pulled away, leaving Karen standing there, arms still crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. I took another sip of my coffee and gave her my best lawyer smile. Well, Karen, if that's all, I'll be heading inside. She didn't respond. She just turned on her heel and stormed off toward her house. The neighbors, who had been quietly observing the whole ordeal, lingered for a few moments longer before dispersing, a few of them shaking their heads. One of them, my next-door neighbor, gave me a knowing look. You know, she's not going to let this go, right? I sighed. Oh, I know. The HOA violation notice arrived the very next morning. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and bore the unmistakable HOA logo in the top corner, bold and stark, as if that somehow made it more legitimate. I sighed, already knowing what it contained before I even opened it. Notice of violation, infraction, unauthorized structural modification, and commercial activity, penalty $500 fine, and a mandatory compliance hearing before the HOA board. I stared at the letter for a moment, then let out a low chuckle. Karen, you really don't know when to quit, do you? My phone buzzed. It was my neighbor Dave, an HOA veteran and longtime survivor of Karen's tyranny. Tell me you got one too, he said, his voice filled with equal parts amusement and frustration. Oh yeah, garage gate continues. Dave let out a long sigh. She's on a rampage. My wife just told me Karen sent out notices to 3 other homeowners this morning. One of them got fined for a flower bed being 2 inches outside HOA parameters. I groaned. Let me guess, another one of those rules she made up? Bingo. I hung up and grabbed my laptop, opening the HOA's official bylaws. If Karen wanted to play the rulebook game, I was going to play it better. The first thing I noticed was that the violation Karen cited, the so-called unauthorized modification and commercial activity, was based on an outdated version of the bylaws. The current legally filed HOA regulations, which I pulled up through my office's state records access, had been updated 3 years ago. And guess what? Nowhere did it prohibit security systems or garage improvements, but Karen hadn't sent out the updated version. Oh no, she was still enforcing the old rules, probably hoping nobody would notice. I smiled. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2, the fine. According to the actual bylaws, no HOA fine over $250 could be levied without a community vote. Karen had simply plucked $500 out of thin air. This wasn't just overreach, this was fraud. A community's growing frustration. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the mailbox station where a small group of homeowners had gathered. The general mood was mutinous. This is ridiculous, one woman huffed, holding up her violation notice. I got fined for having excessively tall grass. It's 2 inches above the curb. A neighbor next to her, arms crossed, added, Karen just told me my fence needs repainting. I repainted it last summer. Another neighbor muttered, she's out of control, but what can we do? She always finds some loophole to stay in power. That's when I spoke up. Not this time. They turned to me, hopeful but wary. I held up the real HOA bylaws. Karen's been running a scam. She's finding people under expired rules and charging amounts that legally require a vote. None of this is enforceable. A beat of silence. Then Dave, grinning, said, oh, she's going to lose it when she hears that. The HOA's dirty playbook exposed. That evening, I started digging deeper into how Karen had maintained her little HOA empire for so long. Turns out she had 3 key tactics. Selective enforcement. Karen never actually enforced rules evenly. She fined people she didn't like but ignored violations when it suited her. A prime example, her own backyard shed, which violated multiple HOA size restrictions. Intimidation. Many homeowners simply paid their fines because they didn't know they could challenge them. Rigged elections. HOA board positions were supposed to be voted on every 2 years, but Karen always found ways to disqualify opponents. Technicalities, missing paperwork, sudden rule changes. If I had any doubts before, they were gone now. This wasn't just bad leadership. This was corruption. I cracked my knuckles. Time to shake things up. A plan takes shape. The first step, the compliance hearing. Karen expected me to walk into that meeting like every other homeowner, intimidated, ready to negotiate, maybe even willing to pay. Instead, I was going to walk in armed with the law. I pulled up state-level HOA statutes and highlighted everything Karen was violating. Then, just for fun, I drafted a formal complaint against the HOA's fraudulent practices, one that I could file directly with the State Attorney General's office. Oh, and the best part? I was the Attorney General, the HOA's breaking point. By the next morning, word had spread. Homeowners started questioning their fines, pulling out their own bylaws, and demanding explanations. Karen must have realized the tide was turning because by noon, She had sent out a clarification email claiming some old policies were mistakenly referenced. Concerned residents may bring their complaints to the board. The HOA maintains full authority to enforce compliance. Translation: she knew she was in trouble, but she wasn't backing down. Not yet. So I prepared for the upcoming hearing from hell, where I planned to completely dismantle Karen's little empire one legal argument at a time. She wanted to play dirty? Fine. She just forgot one thing: I don't lose. The HOA meeting room was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and now homeowners, normally indifferent to HOA politics, had shown up in droves. Some were there out of curiosity, others out of frustration. And then there was Karen, perched at the head of the table, radiating smug confidence like a villain in a bad courtroom drama. I walked in, a folder tucked under my arm, and immediately felt the tension in the air. Karen's eyes narrowed as I took a seat across from her. To her left sat her usual lineup of loyalists, mostly people she had handpicked for the board over the years. To her right, the HOA's legal consultant, an older man in a cheap suit, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Karen cleared her throat. This hearing is now in session to address the violation committed by, she paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air, Mr. Attorney General. A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. She was loving this. She thought she had me cornered. I leaned back, unfazed. By all means, proceed. She smirked, flipping open a binder. Mr. Attorney General, you have been found in violation of HOA policy regarding unauthorized structural modifications and unapproved commercial activity within a residential zone. This hearing will determine the appropriate penalty for your infractions. I crossed my arms. And what exactly am I accused of? Karen gestured dramatically to a projector screen, which flickered on, displaying a zoomed-in photo of my garage door. There was an awkward pause. Someone coughed. I waited, then finally said, seriously? Presenting a picture of a garage door as evidence of crime. Karen's jaw tightened. The door is new, which means it's a modification. And per HOA regulations, all structural modifications must be approved by the board. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, that rule applies to major construction, like building a second story or adding an extension, not replacing a garage door. She huffed. It still alters the exterior appearance. Really? Then tell me. I flipped open the real HOA bylaws. Where in this document does it state that replacing a garage door requires board approval? Karen stiffened. It's in the regulations. Then read it to me. I slid the bylaw book across the table. Karen hesitated because she knew it wasn't in there. Her lawyer coughed, looking down at his notes, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage this. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Homeowners were catching on. I decided to keep going. And the so-called commercial activity, Karen straightened, flipping to another page in her binder. We have photographic evidence that you have a suspicious number of tools in your garage, more tools than an average homeowner would need, which indicates that you are conducting unauthorized business operations. The room fell silent. Then, from the back, someone let out a single incredulous laugh. Karen, I said, rubbing my temples, are you seriously suggesting that owning tools means I'm running a business? It's highly unusual, she shot back, a little more desperate now. HOA bylaws clearly state that residential properties cannot be used for commercial purposes. I exhaled, flipping open the actual legal statutes governing HOA authority. According to state law, a homeowner is allowed to own as many tools as they want without it constituting a business. Furthermore, there is no proof that I am selling or providing any services from my garage. I leaned forward. Do you have tax records, customer complaints, a single invoice proving that I'm operating a business? Karen's face went red. Then I continued, my voice calm but firm. Your accusation has zero legal standing. The crowd was whispering now. Some were nodding in agreement. Karen's lawyer, clearly seeing the direction this was heading, shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should, but I wasn't done. I pulled out another document and slid it across the table. This, I said, is a request for an official audit of HOA finances. Silence. Karen's head snapped up. What? While preparing for this hearing, I came across some interesting discrepancies in the way fines and fees have been handled by the HOA. I tapped the paper. According to state law, HOA fines over $250 require a community vote, but you've been unilaterally issuing fines way above that amount. That's illegal. Karen's face turned from red to ash and white. But that's not even the worst part. I continued smoothly. You've also been collecting fines for violations based on outdated and invalid bylaws, meaning every single fine issued in the past 3 years is unenforceable and possibly fraudulent. The room erupted. Homeowners who had been silently suffering under Karen's rule were now furious. "What about the money we paid?" someone shouted. Another person stood up. "I got fined $800 last year for a flower bed." "Are you saying that was illegal?" Karen stammered, looking to her lawyer, who had already started gathering his papers as if trying to escape before the explosion. I smiled. "Oh, and one last thing. If there is any indication that HOA funds have been misused, say for personal expenses, then that's embezzlement, and I would be very interested in investigating that." Karen's chair scraped against the floor as she abruptly stood up. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We don't have to listen to this. The board will review this matter privately." I leaned back, smiling. "Actually, Karen, you don't have the authority to decide that anymore." I turned to the homeowners. "As of right now, you all have the legal grounds to call a vote to remove the current HOA board immediately." The room exploded in cheers and murmurs. People were already pulling out their phones to text neighbors, whispering excitedly. Karen realized what was happening. She looked around, eyes wide, then suddenly turned and stormed out of the room. Her lawyer followed her, and just like that, Karen's reign began to crumble. Karen stormed out of the meeting room, her rhinestone-encrusted highway Queen water bottle clutched tightly in one hand. She wasn't used to losing, definitely not like this, publicly, humiliatingly, and with the entire neighborhood cheering me on. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no, a narcissist like her never accepted defeat quietly. Karen's desperate counterattack the next morning was hard. Before 9 a.m., my inbox was flooded with HOA emails, each one more ridiculous than the last. Emergency board decision. Effective immediately, the HOA board has issued a new ruling that security cameras are not permitted on private garages. Violation notice. Your garbage cans were left 6 inches outside the approved storage area. $200 fine. Community order. Homeowners are advised that outside legal interference in HOA matters is strongly discouraged. And the best part? She sent a formal complaint to the State Bar Association accusing me of abusing legal authority for personal gain. Oh, Karen, you really thought that would work. The surprise HOA inspection by noon escalated again. She showed up at my house, clipboard in hand, flanked by a so-called official HOA inspector, a guy who looked like he'd been hired off Craigslist 15 minutes prior. She knocked on my door, smiling like she had already won. "Attorney General or not, you still have to comply with HOA rules," she said sweetly. "We are here to conduct a mandatory inspection of your property." I smiled back. "Great. Do you have a court order?" Karen blinked. "This is an HOA jurisdiction matter. No court order is required." I pulled out my phone. Actually, under state law, the HOA cannot enter or inspect private property without the homeowner's consent or a legal directive. Karen's eyes twitched. The inspector suddenly looked uncomfortable, but I wasn't done. I hit record on my phone. "Since this is an official HOA action, I'd like to document it for transparency," I said. The inspector immediately stepped back. I just got hired for this. I don't need to be in a lawsuit." He turned to Karen. "You didn't say anything about needing legal permission." Karen's face turned red. "Just measure the garage." The inspector hesitated. "I think I need to check with my boss," and just like that, he walked off the property. Karen fumed. "This isn't over," she snapped before storming off. She was right. It wasn't. Karen's last pathetic attempt at power was unraveling, but she still had one desperate move left. That night, she sent out an emergency HOA vote proposal. Immediate dissolution of all security cameras in garages, penalty for noncompliance, $1,500 fine per month. She had completely lost it, but she forgot one thing. The HOA could only enforce new rules if they were legally approved by the homeowners, and by this point, nobody supported her. Instead of votes, she got an overwhelming response demanding a vote for her removal. The final blow was a very public exposure. By now, the community was fully against Karen, but I wanted to finish this once and for all, so I posted the full legal breakdown of Karen's fraudulent actions on the neighborhood forum. Illegal HOA fines issued under outdated regulations, misuse of HOA funds including Karen's personal expenses, and selective rule enforcement for personal vendettas. And because Karen was Karen, she responded the only way she knew how, by completely losing her mind. Karen's ultimate meltdown came the next morning at the HOA's last public meeting. Karen snapped. The community showed up in record numbers, homeowners furious about illegal fines, fraudulent rules, and missing HOA money. Karen, standing at the front, lost all composure. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I'm the HOA." Someone recorded it, and it went viral. Her tantrum, complete with foot stomping and arm flailing, became the stuff of neighborhood legend. The vote was unanimous. Karen was removed from the HOA. And then the real punishment arrived. The cops returned, but not for me. By the following week, the state auditors had finished reviewing the HOA's finances. Guess what they found? Over $10,000 in HOA funds used for Karen's personal vacations, HOA funds mysteriously missing from maintenance projects, and illegal fees collected for years. That's embezzlement, and that meant criminal charges. So one morning, as I was enjoying my coffee, I watched as a different set of police officers pulled up, not to my driveway, but to Karen's. She screamed about a conspiracy as they cuffed her. "This is harassment. This is illegal." "Oh, Karen, you should have known better than to call the cops on an attorney general." The aftermath, a new HOA era. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally got the change it needed. The HOA board was restructured with fair, sane people. All fraudulent fines were refunded, and new rules required actual community votes. And me? Well, I installed an even fancier garage door just to flex at the next community meeting. Someone asked, "Think we'll ever have another Karen?" I smirked. "Nah," I said. "I don't think anyone's dumb enough to try that again." The neighborhood felt different in the days following Karen's spectacular downfall. The air seemed lighter, freer, like the whole community had exhaled after years of suffocating under her iron-fisted rule. The infamous video of her meltdown had spread far beyond our little HOA. Even local news had picked up the story. Karen had become a full-blown meme. But this wasn't over. Not yet. She had spent years weaponizing the HOA, enforcing rules that didn't exist, collecting fines that weren't legal, and using community funds for her own personal benefit. Now the real reckoning was about to begin. Karen's house of cards collapsed. The financial audit had been swift and devastating. It turned out Karen's creative bookkeeping wasn't just bad, it was criminal. The first major finding, over $10,000 in unaccounted HOA funds, the auditors found charges that had nothing to do with community upkeep, luxury spa visits, high-end shopping sprees, and travel expenses. She had used HOA funds to book a vacation to Cabo under community development research. But the biggest smoking gun was her personal home improvement projects, which had all been paid for with HOA money. While she'd been handing out fines for non-compliant fences and unauthorized garage doors, she had completely remodeled her own kitchen using community funds. The fallout was immediate. The new HOA board, now run by sane people, held a community-wide meeting to address the findings. The collective anger was like nothing I'd ever seen before. "She stole from all of us," one homeowner shouted. "This is fraud," another muttered. "She belongs in jail." Well, funny they should say that. I had been waiting for the right moment to unleash my next move. See, HOA embezzlement isn't just shady, it's a felony. And, as luck would have it, I happen to be the one person in the state most qualified to prosecute it. The very next day, I filed a formal legal motion against the now disgraced former HOA president, detailing fraudulent collection of fines under outdated bylaws, misuse of HOA funds for personal gain, financial misconduct, and embezzlement. And because life has a way of being poetic, The same police officers Karen had called on me just weeks ago were now showing up at her door again. This time, they weren't leaving without her. Karen's meltdown, the sequel. The neighborhood gathered outside as Karen stood on her front lawn, shrieking at the officers. "This is a setup," she howled. "This is illegal. I'm the HOA." A detective calmly read the charges against her. And then came the moment none of us would ever forget. As Karen was being escorted into the squad car, a neighbor, an older man who had once been fined for having his Christmas lights up 2 days past Karen's deadline, called out, "Hey Karen, maybe they'll let you run the prison HOA?" The entire crowd erupted into cheers and laughter as the police car pulled away. And just like that, Karen was gone. With Karen removed and facing multiple felony charges, the real cleanup began. Every fraudulent fine was refunded. Homeowners received checks in the mail, reimbursing them for every bogus charge Karen had imposed over the years. New leadership took over. The HOA board was now made up of actual community members who didn't want to rule like tyrants. The bylaws were reformed. No more loopholes, no more selective enforcement. Everything had to be voted on by homeowners. One of the best moments was seeing the old HOA office, the shrine to Karen's rule, get completely remodeled into a community space. The Karen regime was over. Karen's fate? You'd think that would be the end of it. But Karen had one last pathetic attempt to escape consequence. She tried to plea bargain, claiming she had only used HOA funds for essential community expenses. The judge, not buying it, sentencing day arrived. The courtroom was packed. A good number of our neighbors showed up, not out of sympathy, but to see justice served. Karen stood before the judge, looking much less smug than usual. Gone was the overconfident, power-drunk HOA tyrant. In her place was a woman finally realizing that her power meant nothing in a real courtroom. The judge read the charges. Then he looked at her. "You misused community funds, manipulated homeowners, and abused your authority," he said, shaking his head. "Frankly, I have never seen such a blatant display of entitlement." Karen sniffled. "I was only trying to help." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You spent HOA money on a luxury cruise." Silence. Karen had no defense. Her final sentence: 2 years of probation, complete repayment of all stolen funds, and a lifetime ban from holding any HOA leadership positions anywhere in the state. Oh, and she had to sell her house to pay back the money she stole. That for sale sign in front of Karen's house was the sweetest victory of all, the perfect ending. The neighborhood threw a party the day Karen officially moved out. We had grill stations, music, and drinks right in front of the house she once terrorized. At one point, someone handed me a drink and asked, "So what's next?" I grinned, glancing toward my garage. "Well," I said, "I was thinking of installing another security camera, just in case." The whole block roared with laughter because this time there was no Karen to stop me. The for sale sign in front of Karen's house stood like a trophy for the entire neighborhood. It had gone up just days after the court ruling, and every time someone passed by, they couldn't help but slow down and admire it. Some people even took selfies in front of it. Karen had spent years terrorizing this community while holding her HOA power like a medieval queen ruling over terrified peasants. But in the end, the law, real law, had caught up to her, and now she was gone. But the victory wasn't just about getting rid of Karen. It was about what came next, the HOA's overhaul. The new HOA board wasted no time fixing everything Karen had broken. First on the list, revising the HOA bylaws. For years, Karen had used outdated, selectively enforced, and completely made-up rules to fine and harass people. That ended immediately. The new rules were simple. Every change or fine had to be voted on by homeowners. No more secret board meetings deciding neighborhood rules behind closed doors. No more harassing homeowners over petty nonsense. The ridiculous fines Karen had imposed were all reversed. Homeowners started receiving refund checks in the mail, reimbursing them for every unfair charge she had hit them with. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, actually cried when she got her refund. Karen had fined her $600 for having a small garden gnome that was supposedly not in compliance with the neighborhood aesthetic. Now she had her money back, and she put the gnome right back where it belonged, in her front yard, wearing a tiny crown, a victory gnome. Karen's last moments in the neighborhood. Hood Karen didn't go quietly. In the days leading up to her forced departure, she tried one last time to win back support. She went door to door, practically begging neighbors to sign a petition against the new HOA board. She knocked on Dave's door, the same Dave she had fined for leaving his garbage can out 4 minutes past the deadline. Dave just laughed and shut the door at her face. She even tried to start a Facebook group for concerned HOA members to rally against the unfair treatment she had received. The only comment on her first post was, "Karen, take the L and move on." She deleted the group the next day. When the moving truck finally pulled up in front of her house, the entire block watched. People brought out lawn chairs. Someone even set up a popcorn machine. Karen saw them watching and flipped them off before slamming her car door. And just like that, she was gone. The moment her car turned off the street, someone from the HOA board walked up and ripped down the for sale sign. Cheers erupted. The neighborhood finally breathed again. With Karen gone, things actually started to feel normal. People started using their yards again without fear of being fined. Garage doors stayed open without Karen skulking around with a clipboard. Even community events made a comeback. For the first time in years, the HOA actually held a block party. No hidden fines, no HOA spies walking around measuring grass height, just good food, music, and people actually enjoying their neighborhood. And of course, the most popular attraction at the block party was Karen's former house, now empty, now powerless. The garage flexed, and me? Well, after everything I'd been through, I decided it was only right to celebrate in my own way. So I did what Karen would have absolutely hated the most. I upgraded my garage again, bigger, smarter, with even more security cameras. And because I knew it would send Karen into a rage spiral wherever she was, I even installed a custom neon sign inside that read, "Welcome to the Karen-free zone." It glowed beautifully at night. One evening, as I sat in my driveway, sipping a well-earned beer, Dave walked over, nodding toward the garage. "Think we'll ever have another Karen?" he asked. I smirked.